Dr. Sarah Vachon's 17 years of wolf research meant nothing the moment she saw the alpha male do the impossible. She'd documented hundreds of kills, tracked pack dynamics through brutal winters, published 12 peer-reviewed papers on canid social hierarchy. None of it prepared her for what appeared on her monitor that October afternoon in the Superior National Forest Field Station. The footage was routine. Camera trap 7 positioned near a fresh deer carcass the Kawishiwi pack had taken down 30 minutes earlier. Sarah was logging timestamps noting which wolves fed first, documenting the rigid hierarchy that governed every meal. Beta male waiting for alpha's signal. Yearlings holding back until subordinates finished. The ancient order that kept wolf society functioning. Then movement at the frame's edge made her finger freeze on the keyboard. A dog. Border collie, maybe. Black and white coat matted with burrs and mud, limping badly on its front left leg. The animal moved like every step cost something, like pain had become so familiar it was just another part of breathing. It was emaciated, ribs visible even through the thick coat, hip bones jutting at angles that made Sarah's stomach clench. The dog was walking directly toward 8 feeding wolves. Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and throat. In 17 years, she had never seen a stray dog survive approaching an active kill site. Never. Wolves didn't share with coyotes, didn't tolerate foxes, certainly didn't welcome domestic dogs into their most territorial moments. The outcome was predictable, documented, scientifically certain. The stray would die, probably within seconds. The alpha male saw the dog first. His head came up from the carcass, muzzle dark with blood. He was massive, nearly 90 pounds of muscle and survival instinct. Sarah had watched him drive off a black bear twice his size the previous spring. She'd documented him killing a coyote that ventured too close to den sites. He was efficient, territorial, exactly what an alpha should be. He went completely still, not the stillness before attack. Sarah knew that posture intimately, had filmed it dozens of times. The coiled tension, hackles rising, lips pulling back to expose teeth. This was different. The alpha stood motionless, but his ears were forward. Curious, not aggressive, his tail held neutral, not raised, in dominance display. The rest of the pack noticed the intruder. The beta male's head snapped toward the approaching dog. A subordinate female growled, low and warning. 2 yearlings shifted their weight, ready to spring if the alpha gave the signal. But the alpha didn't signal. He just watched the dog limp closer, 15 feet away, 10 feet. Close enough that Sarah could see the dog's eyes on the screen, exhausted and desperate, and somehow resigned to whatever came next. The dog stopped 8 feet from the kill. It didn't approach further. Just stood there, trembling slightly. Not from fear, Sarah realized, from weakness, from hunger, so complete it had become its own kind of gravity. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands had started shaking so badly she had to set down her coffee. In 17 years, she'd never seen a stray dog survive this approach. Everything in her training said the next moment would be violence. Quick, efficient, terminal. The alpha male moved. He lowered his head to the carcass, jaws closing around a section of haunch and tearing meat free with precision. But instead of consuming it, instead of feeding himself or offering it to his mate or reinforcing pack hierarchy, he did something that made Sarah's breath stop entirely. He walked toward the dog. Carrying the meat in his jaws, the alpha moved with deliberate slowness, not stalking, not threatening, almost careful, like he was approaching something fragile that might break. The dog didn't run. It couldn't, probably. Too weak, too injured, too far past the point where flight meant anything. The alpha stopped 3 feet from the stray. Every wolf in the pack had frozen, watching. The beta male's growl died in his throat. The subordinate female's ears flicked forward in what looked like confusion. The alpha placed the meat on the ground at the dog's feet. Then, in a movement so deliberate it seemed almost ceremonial, he lay down between the stray dog and his entire pack. Sarah heard a sound she didn't recognize for several seconds. A soft, shocked gasp. It was coming from her own throat. The dog stared at the meat, at the massive wolf lying in the leaves between it and danger. Then, moving like it expected this to be a trap, the dog lowered its head and began to eat. The alpha didn't move. He lay there, calm and watchful, a living barrier between the outsider and every wolf whose instinct screamed to drive off competition. When the beta male shifted forward slightly, the alpha's ear twitched back. Just that, the smallest signal. The beta male stopped. Sarah's vision blurred. She realized her eyes were burning, tears forming without her permission. Everything she learned in graduate school screamed this couldn't happen. Wolves don't share with outside canids. Competition for resources is absolute. Hierarchy is survival. You don't feed strangers. You don't protect weakness. You can't. But she was watching it happen. Frame by frame, second by second, impossible and real. She kept the footage running, fingers shaking as she created a new file label. Day 1, Kawashiwi Pack, Unknown Border Collie. She didn't know why she added Day 1. Some instinct told her this wasn't an isolated moment. What happened in the next 43 seconds would unravel everything she thought she understood about wolf behavior. The dog finished eating in under a minute. Tore through the meat like it hadn't seen food in weeks. It probably hadn't. Sarah watched the stray's ribs expand and contract with. Each desperate swallow watched the trembling in its legs ease slightly as protein hit its system. The alpha male remained motionless, still lying between the dog and his pack, creating a zone of protection that defied every hierarchical principle Sarah had spent her career studying. His mate, the alpha female, stood 20 feet away near the main carcass. Her ears were forward, alert, watching her partner with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read, the slight tilt of her head, the way her tail lowered from its dominant position to something more neutral. Recognition, maybe. Understanding something Sarah couldn't yet grasp. The dog lifted its head from the stripped bone. Its muzzle was dark with blood now, mirroring the alpha's. For a moment, the two canids simply looked at each other. The massive wild wolf and the broken domestic dog. Sarah held her breath without meaning to. The alpha stood, slowly. Deliberate, careful not to make sudden movements. The dog flinched backwards slightly, that front leg buckling under its weight. But the alpha didn't advance. He turned his back on the stray, walking calmly toward his pack. Turning your back on a potential threat violated basic survival instinct. Sarah's pen had stopped moving across her notepad. She realized she'd been holding it suspended above the page, frozen in the act of documentation. The beta male approached the alpha as he returned. Sarah recognized the body language immediately, submission mixed with questioning. The beta's ears flattened, tail low, but his eyes kept flicking toward the stray dog, asking permission, asking for explanation. The alpha touched his nose to the beta's muzzle, a brief contact, gentle. Then he moved past, returning to the carcass where the rest of the pack waited. They fed, all of them. The normal hierarchy reasserted itself. Alpha pair first, then beta male, then subordinates in their established order. Like nothing unusual had occurred, like feeding a stranger wasn't an act that should get an alpha challenged or driven out. But the dog was still there. It had backed away from the bone, limping toward a fallen log 15 feet from the main kill site. Not fleeing, just creating distance, respecting space. The stray collapsed beside the log, flanks heaving, exhausted from eating probably, or from the adrenaline crash of surviving something that should have ended in death. Sarah checked the timestamp. The wolves fed for 18 minutes. She watched every second, kept waiting for one of them to rush the dog, to claim territory, eliminate competition, do what wolves do, but they just fed. Occasionally one would glance toward the stray. The yearlings especially, young wolves still learning pack dynamics and clearly confused about what this moment meant. The alpha male fed last. After his mate, after the beta, after even the lowest-ranking yearling had taken their share. Then he did something that made Sarah's coffee go cold in her hand. Forgotten he tore off another piece of meat. Smaller than the first, but substantial, carried it toward the dog. The stray's head lifted weakly. Its eyes tracked the alpha's approach, but the animal didn't move. Couldn't maybe. Too depleted, too shocked, too far beyond the capacity for appropriate fear. The alpha placed the second piece of meat beside the dog's front paws. Then he backed away 3 steps, not lying down this time, just standing there, watching, making sure the dog understood the meat was offered, not bait for a trap. The dog ate again, slower this time, like its stomach was remembering how to process food. The alpha watched for 10 seconds, then turned and walked back to his pack. Sarah's hands were shaking, actually trembling as she tried to write observational notes. Her handwriting looked like someone else's, jagged and uncertain. She wrote, "second feeding." And then her pen just stayed pressed against the page, ink bleeding into a dark spot. Everything she learned in graduate school screamed, this couldn't happen. Wolves don't share with outside canids. They can't afford to. Resources are survival. Competition is death. You protect your pack, not strangers. You maintain hierarchy, not chaos. But she was watching it happen. The alpha had fed the stray twice, protected it from his own pack, turned his back on it in a gesture that communicated trust or teaching or something Sarah didn't have vocabulary for. She labeled the footage, saved it to 3 separate backup drives. Her mentor's words from graduate school echoed in her head. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. She had the evidence, frame by frame, second by second, but she had no explanation that wouldn't sound insane. I labeled that footage day 1. I didn't know I was documenting a revolution. Sarah returned to the field site at dawn the next morning. She told herself it was routine documentation, part of the ongoing study. But her truck was moving 20 miles over the speed limit on the Forest Service Road, and her camera bag had been packed since 4 a.m. The dog was still there. She found it through her binoculars, lying in the same spot beside the fallen log. The pack was 50 yards away, bedded down in their usual resting site near a cluster of white pines. Separate, but not distant. The stray's head was up, alert, watching the wolves like it expected them to change their minds about letting it live. Sarah set up her observation post. Telephoto lens, notebook, thermos of coffee she wouldn't remember to drink. The October sun climbed slowly through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. At 7:43 a.m. the alpha male stood, stretched, shook off sleep, then picked up what looked like a rabbit carcass from beside the resting site. Carried it directly to the dog. Placed it down. Backed away. The exact same choreography as yesterday. The dog ate. The alpha returned to his pack. Sarah's pen moved across the page, automatically, time, behavior, distance between animals. But her mind was racing ahead trying to find the scientific framework that explained this. Aberrant behavior, temporary insanity, some kind of neurological damage that compromised his survival instinct. Except he didn't look damaged, he looked deliberate. Day 3 was the same. Day 4. Day 5. Sarah stopped going back to her cabin in Grand Marais. She slept in her truck, woke before dawn, documented every interaction. Her field notes filled an entire notebook. Her memory cards held 72 hours of footage. The dog was getting stronger. She could see it in the way it moved. The limp was still there, that front left leg dragging slightly, but the desperate trembling had stopped. Ribs still showed, but less prominently. It was eating regularly, being fed regularly by a wild wolf who should have killed it on sight. On day 8, something shifted. Sarah was filming the morning feeding, the now familiar ritual of the alpha bringing food. But this time, when he backed away, he didn't return immediately to the pack. He stopped 10 feet from the stray, lay down, just rested there, between the dog and the other wolves. The alpha female stood from the pack's resting site. Sarah's hands tightened on her camera. This was it. The moment the alpha's mate decided this insanity had gone too far. Female wolves were fiercely protective of pack resources, especially heading into winter. She would challenge this. End it. The alpha female walked toward her mate. Slow, measured steps, she reached him, touched her nose to his shoulder. Then she looked at the dog. The stray had frozen, meat still in its mouth, every muscle tensed for flight it couldn't manage. The alpha female took 3 steps toward the dog. Sarah stopped breathing. Her finger hovered over the camera's record button, shaking. The female lowered her head, picked up a section of the rabbit carcass the dog hadn't finished. For a moment, Sarah thought she was reclaiming it, taking back what belonged to the pack. But instead, the alpha female carried it closer to the dog, placed it within easier reach of the stray's injured leg. Then she lay down beside her mate. 2 alphas, both positioned between their pack and an outsider who had no right to their protection. Sarah's throat closed, her eyes burned. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, terrified of missing a single second of documentation. The dog ate. The alpha pair rested. The rest of the pack watched from their position in the pines, confusion evident in every line of their postures. That night, Sarah called her mentor at Cornell. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone. "David," she said when he answered, "I'm watching something that shouldn't exist." There was a long pause. She heard him shifting, could picture him sitting up in his office chair. "Tell me," he said. "A wild alpha is feeding a stray dog, has been for 8 days, not just tolerating it, protecting it, and now his mate is doing it too." Another pause, longer this time. "Document everything," David finally said. His voice was steady, but Sarah heard something underneath it. Wonder, maybe, or disbelief. "Everything, Sarah. Every second." "I am," she whispered. "But I don't have a framework for this." "Then maybe we need a new framework." Week 2 became week 3. The dog grew stronger, and then the pack started changing. It happened on day 23. Sarah almost missed it because she was changing camera batteries, looking down at her equipment bag for maybe 10 seconds. When she looked up, the beta male was walking toward the dog, not charging, not stalking, walking. The same deliberate approach the alphas had been using for 3 weeks. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. Her hands fumbled with the camera, nearly dropping it as she brought the viewfinder to her eye. The beta male had never approached the stray before. None of the subordinate wolves had. They watched from distance, clearly unsettled by their leader's behavior, but they maintained the invisible boundary the alphas had created. Until now. The dog saw him coming, its head lifted, ears flattening against its skull. That front leg tensed, ready to push the stray upright for flight, even though flight meant agony. But the beta male's posture wasn't aggressive. His tail hung neutral. His ears were forward but not pinned back. He carried something in his jaws, a chunk of venison from the previous night's kill. Sarah's breath stopped. She held the camera so tightly her knuckles went white, terrified any movement might somehow disrupt what she was witnessing. The beta male stopped 5 feet from the dog. He glanced back toward the alpha male, who lay resting 30 yards away beneath the pines. The alpha's head was up, watching. But he didn't move, didn't signal warning or approval, just observed. The beta placed the meat on the ground, then mimicking exactly what he'd watched his leaders do for 23 days, he backed away 3 careful steps. The dog stared at the offering, at the wolf, at the meat. Like its mind couldn't process that a second pack member was now feeding it, protecting it. The beta male turned and walked back toward the pack, not hurrying, calm, measured, like he'd just performed a normal pack behavior instead of shattering every hierarchical principle Sarah had built her career understanding. She was shaking, actually trembling so hard the camera footage would be unusable, blurred by the motion of her hands. She lowered the equipment, pressed her palms against her thighs, tried to steady herself. The beta male reached the alpha, touched his nose to the larger wolf's muzzle. The alpha returned the gesture, acceptance, approval, teaching confirmed. Sarah grabbed her notebook, wrote, Day 23, beta male feeds stray, and then her handwriting dissolved into illegible scrawl. She crossed it out, started again. Her pen tore through the page. 3 days later, a subordinate female approached the dog, brought it a rabbit she'd cached from her own hunt. The alpha pair watched from distance, didn't intervene. The female placed the food, backed away, returned to the pack. By day 30, even the yearlings were participating, the youngest wolves, barely 8 months old, bringing scraps to the stray. Learning from their elders that hierarchy could include something Sarah didn't have vocabulary for, mercy, maybe, or compassion, or some wolf concept humans had never documented because we'd never seen it expressed this way. The rigid structure that defined wolf survival was dissolving. Sarah watched it happen through her camera lens, documented it in hundreds of hours of footage, and still couldn't believe it. Feeding time became different. The alpha pair still fed first, that much remained. But after them, the order grew fluid. The beta male would feed, then step back and allow a yearling to approach. The subordinate female fed alongside wolves who outranked her. The lowest-ranking wolf in the pack, a small male who usually waited until everyone else finished, fed third one afternoon. The others simply let him. And the dog. The dog now approached the kills. Not closely, still maintaining respectful distance. But it no longer waited by the fallen log for food to be brought. It moved to within 20 feet of active feeding, and the pack allowed it. Sarah wrote impossible in her field notes 14 times that week. Her handwriting got shakier with each entry. Her documentation became scattered, fragmented, full of question marks and crossed-out observations that sounded too emotional for scientific record. But emotion was all she had, because the data was showing her something that contradicted every paper she'd published, every principle she'd taught to graduate students, every fundamental truth about canid social structure. The alpha male wasn't just feeding a stray dog, he was teaching his entire pack that the rules could change. That survival didn't have to mean cruelty. That hierarchy could bend without breaking. I thought I was watching an anomaly. Then winter arrived and I realized I was watching intention. The first snow came early that year, November 6th, 3 weeks before normal. Sarah woke in her truck to find 4 inches already on the ground and more falling thick through the pines. Winter in northern Minnesota wasn't gradual. It arrived like a fist. She knew what this meant. Prey would scatter, move to lower elevations, Deer would yard up, harder to hunt. Every calorie would matter. Every mouth to feed would become a question of survival. The pack would have to make a choice about the dog. Sarah had been dreading this moment since day one. She'd watched the alpha's protection through the easy abundance of autumn, when kills were frequent and food relatively plentiful. But winter was different. Winter was when wolf packs starved. When the weak were driven out, when every decision became binary, survive or don't. The dog would be a liability now, an extra competitor for resources the pack desperately needed. If the alpha had any survival instinct left, he would withdraw his protection. Let nature correct this impossible aberration. She settled into her observation post, brushing snow off her equipment. Through the binoculars, she found the pack bedded down in a dense thicket of spruce. The dog was separate, 20 yards away, curled tight against a birch tree, its injured leg tucked close, shivering slightly. At 10:17 a.m. the pack stirred. The alpha male stood, shook off snow, scanned the forest. Hunting time. Sarah had documented this routine hundreds of times. The pack would move out, leave the weak behind to conserve energy. The dog lifted its head, watched them prepare. It didn't try to stand. That leg couldn't handle a hunt. The alpha male looked at the dog for a long moment. Then he moved toward it. Sarah's hands tightened on her binoculars. The alpha approached to within 5 feet, lowered his head. For a heartbeat, Sarah thought he was going to drive the dog away. End this because survival demanded it. Instead, he touched his nose to the dog's shoulder, gentle, brief. Then he turned and led his pack into the forest to hunt. They were gone for 6 hours. Sarah waited, camera ready, documenting the empty clearing. The dog slept fitfully, waking every 20 minutes to scan for danger. Snow kept falling. The temperature dropped. By 2 p.m., Sarah's toes were numb inside her boots. At 4:38 p.m., as dusk turned the forest grey, the pack returned. They'd made a kill. Sarah could tell by the blood on their muzzles, the satisfied heaviness in their movements. A deer, probably. They hadn't brought any back. This was normal. Wolves didn't usually cache food this early in winter. But the alpha male was carrying something in his jaws. Sarah raised her camera, zoomed in. A haunch section, substantial. Several pounds of meat the alpha had carried for what must have been miles. He walked directly to the dog. The stray struggled to its feet, that injured leg shaking with effort. Its ribs were showing again, more prominent than they'd been in weeks. The autumn feeding had added weight, but a day without food in this cold had stripped it away. The alpha placed the meat in front of the dog, but he didn't back away this time. He lay down beside it, close enough that their fur almost touched, sharing body heat while the dog ate. Sarah's throat closed up. Her vision blurred, and she had to lower the camera, press her gloved hands against her eyes. When she looked again, the alpha was still there, still lying beside the stray. His own ribs were visible through his winter coat. He was thin. The whole pack was thin. This wasn't autumn abundance anymore. This was the leading edge of scarcity. And the alpha had carried food for miles, had chosen to feed the dog before feeding himself. In the moment when survival said take everything, keep everything, protect only your own, he had chosen differently. Her hands shook as she wrote the observation. Nov. 6, first major snow. Alpha feeds dog first, before himself, pack showing signs of early winter stress. Then she set down her pen because her handwriting had become illegible through the shaking. My throat closed up. I watched through binoculars as the alpha stood back, ribs showing through his coat while the dog ate. Every principle of natural selection said this wolf should be dead by spring. But he wasn't operating on instinct anymore. He was operating on something I didn't have words for. Spring came slowly to the Superior National Forest. The snow retreated in patches, revealing brown grass and last year's leaves. Ice broke on the smaller lakes. Deer emerged from their winter yards, moving cautiously through the awakening forest. The Kawishiwi pack had survived, barely. All 8 wolves were gaunt, their winter coats hanging loose on frames that had burned through every reserve of fat. The dog was still with them. Sarah had watched through the hardest months, documenting survival at its rawest edge. There were days she thought the stray wouldn't make it. Days when it couldn't stand, when the alpha had to bring food directly to where it lay. Days when she prepared herself to document a death. But the dog lived. And something in the pack had fundamentally changed. She saw it first in how they moved together. The rigid spacing that defined wolf hierarchy had softened. Subordinates walked alongside dominants without the constant corrections, the snaps and snarls that maintained order. The yearlings, now almost full-grown, showed a gentleness with each other Sarah had never documented in young wolves. They played differently, more like domestic dogs than wild wolves, extended play sessions that served no clear purpose for establishing dominance. The beta male and a subordinate female tumbling together in the mud, no winner, no loser, just movement for the joy of it. And feeding. Feeding had become almost unrecognizable. Sarah filmed a kill in early April, a young buck, enough meat for the whole pack. She watched through her telephoto lens as the alpha pair fed first. That much remained, but then the alpha male stepped back before he'd finished, not driven off, not yielding to challenge, just backing away, creating space. The beta male approached, fed. Then he did something that made Sarah's hand freeze on the camera controls. He stepped back too, deliberately, before he'd taken his full share. A subordinate female moved in, fed briefly, stepped back. The pattern repeated, each wolf feeding, then yielding space before they'd satisfied their hunger, creating room for the others. No aggression, no competition, just an understanding that the whole pack would eat, that scarcity didn't have to mean cruelty. The dog fed fourth, not last, fourth, before 2 subordinate wolves and both yearlings fed and stepped back just like the others, participating in a ritual that had never existed before the alpha male placed meat at the feet of a dying stray 6 months ago. Sarah sat in her truck that night and cried, not sad tears, awestruck tears. This wolf had taught his family that hierarchy could include mercy, that survival could coexist with compassion, that the rigid structures that governed their lives could bend without breaking. She thought about her graduate seminars, about teaching students that wolf packs were ruthless meritocracies where the weak were eliminated, about lecturing on resource competition and survival of the fittest, about presenting wolf behavior as a model of efficient, brutal, natural selection. Everything she'd taught was true, was documented, was observed across thousands of wolf packs in dozens of ecosystems. But it wasn't complete, because she'd never imagined a wolf could choose to change the rules, could decide that the way things had always been wasn't the way they had to be. The pups were born in late April. Sarah knew when it happened, because the alpha female disappeared into the den for 3 days. The alpha male stood guard, bringing her food, maintaining the perimeter. Normal behavior, expected. But when the pups emerged 6 weeks later, stumbling on oversized paws, exploring their world with clumsy enthusiasm, the dog was there, lying near the den entrance. The alpha pair allowed it, more than allowed. The female would rest her head on the dog's flank while nursing. The male would leave the pups in the stray's presence while he hunted. They trusted the dog with their children, the most precious resource a wolf pack had, the future of their genetics, their teaching, their survival. They trusted a creature that had been an outsider. That had no biological claim to this pack. That was, by every measure Sarah had been taught, a competitor. She documented the pups learning to play. They tumbled over the dog's legs, chewed on its ears, slept piled against its warm body. And the dog was gentle, patient, present in a way that spoke of understanding its role in something larger than itself. I sat in my truck and cried, not sad tears, awe-struck tears. This wolf had taught his family that hierarchy could include mercy. I prepared my presentation for the Wildlife Biology Conference. I had no idea I was about to fall apart in front of 300 colleagues. The Wildlife Biology Conference was held in Minneapolis that year. Late June, the convention center packed with researchers from across North America. Sarah had presented at this conference 7 times before. She knew the rhythm. 15-minute presentation, 5 minutes for questions, polite academic discourse. She'd never been nervous. She was terrified now. Her hands shook as she connected her laptop to the projector. 400 seats in the auditorium. She could see colleagues she'd known for years. Professors who'd taught her, graduate students who'd read her papers. David was in the 3rd row, her mentor, the man who'd told her to document everything. His face was carefully neutral. She started with the basics: pack identification, study duration, standard methodology. Her voice was steady, professional. Then she showed the first clip, the alpha male placing meat at the stray dog's feet, lying down between the dog and his pack. The auditorium went silent. That particular silence that meant people were paying attention. Really paying attention. She showed more footage. The beta male feeding the dog, the alpha sharing body heat during the blizzard, the systematic breakdown of feeding hierarchy. Her narration stayed clinical, academic, descriptive, rather than interpretive. Then she showed the winter footage. The alpha carrying meat for miles, feeding the dog before feeding himself. His ribs visible through his coat. The choice to share in the moment of greatest scarcity. Someone in the audience gasped, audible, sharp. Sarah's throat tightened. She kept going, showed the spring feeding patterns, the gentle play, the pups sleeping against the dog's body. 17 months of documentation compressed into 20 minutes of footage that shouldn't exist. She stopped the video, looked out at the audience, 300 faces staring back at her. Some confused, some skeptical, some with expressions she couldn't read. "Questions," she said. A hand shot up. Dr. Marcus Chen from UC Berkeley, prominent wolf behaviorist. The alpha shows signs of neurological damage in that footage. Lateral movement in the 3rd clip suggests possible distemper, or "He's healthy," Sarah interrupted. "I documented normal hunting behavior, appropriate responses to threats, successful pack leadership for 18 months, no signs of illness." Another hand. Dr. Patricia Voss from the University of Montana. The footage could be edited, compiled from multiple encounters to create a false narrative of continuous. Sarah played a 12-minute uncut sequence, single camera angle, no edits. The alpha lying beside the dog during a rainstorm, not moving, using his body to block wind and freezing rain, while the rest of the pack sheltered in a cave. The timestamp visible in the corner, 6 hours compressed to 12 minutes of time-lapse. The auditorium was silent again. Different silence now, heavier. She tried to continue, tried to describe the behavioral implications, the questions this raised about wolf cognition and capacity for learned compassion. But her voice cracked, actually broke mid-sentence. She stopped, took a breath, tried again. The moment the alpha stood in freezing rain protecting the sleeping dog, her voice failed. She couldn't finish the sentence. Her hands were shaking, her eyes burning. These weren't just data points anymore. This wasn't just unprecedented behavior. This was a wolf who had chosen mercy over instinct, who had taught his entire family that survival didn't have to mean cruelty, who had fundamentally changed what his pack believed was possible. And she was standing in front of 300 scientists trying to describe it in academic language, trying to contain something that couldn't be contained, trying to reduce wonder to methodology. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The microphone caught it, amplified it through the auditorium. "I can't. These aren't just observations." This alpha male rewrote the rules. He chose compassion when everything in his biology said to choose survival. And his pack followed him. They learned that hierarchy could include gentleness, that winter, scarcity didn't have to mean abandoning the weak. She stopped, pressed her hand against her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face now, and she couldn't stop them. David stood from the third row, walked to the stage, put his hand on her shoulder. "Show them the final clip," he said quietly. "The one you sent me last week." Sarah nodded. Her hands shook as she advanced the slides. The last piece of footage, taken 2 weeks ago right before she left the field site to prepare this presentation. "Recording this behavior changed how I see the animal world, how I see capacity for choice. If you feel that shift too, subscribe to the channel. These stories need witnesses." The footage was dated June 8th. Early morning, the forest soft with new light. Sarah's camera was positioned on her usual observation post, telephoto lens aimed at the pack's current den site. She'd returned one final time before the conference, one last documentation session before she closed this chapter of research and tried to make sense of what she'd witnessed. The pack was resting in their typical formation, alpha pair near the den entrance, beta male and subordinate wolves scattered in a loose perimeter. The pups, now 12 weeks old, tumbling over each other in clumsy play. And the dog, always the dog, lying near the alpha female, its greying muzzle resting on its paws. The stray was old. Sarah had known that from the beginning, but 17 months of close observation had revealed just how old, the white spreading across its face, the way it moved more stiffly each week, the long periods of sleep. She'd estimated 8 years minimum, maybe 10, ancient for a border collie that had survived alone in the wilderness. At 6:42 a.m. something changed. The dog tried to stand. Its legs buckled. It tried again, managed to get upright, swaying. The alpha female's head came up immediately, alert, watching. The dog took 3 steps away from the den toward the tree line. Then it collapsed. The alpha female was on her feet instantly. She moved to the dog, touched her nose to its ribs. The stray's flanks were heaving, breath rapid and shallow. The female turned her head, made a sound Sarah had never heard her make. Not quite a howl, not a bark, something between distress and summons. The alpha male appeared from the forest within seconds. He must have been close, probably hunting nearby. He went directly to the dog, lowered his head, sniffed carefully. Then he lay down beside it, pressed his body against the stray's, sharing warmth. The dog's breathing slowed, steadied. It turned its head slightly, looked at the wolf lying beside it. Then its eyes closed. Sarah's hand tightened on the camera. She knew what she was watching. She'd seen enough death in the field to recognize it. The dog was dying, not from injury, not from starvation, just from the accumulated weight of years and hardship and survival past the point where survival should have been possible. The alpha male didn't move. He stayed pressed against the dog. His mate joined him on the other side. 2 wolves bracketing the dying stray, sharing body heat, offering presents. The other pack members approached, one by one. The beta male first, then the subordinate wolves. They didn't crowd, just came close, touched their noses to the dog's fur. Brief contact, acknowledgement. Then they backed away, forming a loose circle. The pups tried to approach. The subordinate female gently intercepted them, herding them back toward the den. Not harshly, just guiding them away from something they were too young to understand. Sarah watched through the camera lens. Her breathing had gone shallow. Silent tears ran down her face, but she didn't lower the camera. Didn't stop recording. This was part of the documentation, the end of the story she'd been following for 17 months. The dog's breathing became irregular, pauses between breaths growing longer. The alpha male shifted closer, if that was possible. His head rested across the dog's shoulders now. The female pressed tighter against the stray's back. At 7:09 a.m., the dog took a final breath. Its body relaxed. The tension that had held it together for so many years through injury and starvation and impossible survival simply released. The alpha male went still, absolutely motionless in a way that reminded Sarah of that first day, that first moment when he'd seen the limping stray approach his kill. But this stillness was different, heavier, weighted with something that looked disturbingly like grief. He stayed there for 18 hours. Sarah documented all of it. The alpha male lying beside the body, not eating, barely moving. The pack members approaching periodically, touching the dog's still form with their noses. The way they each paused there, silent, for long moments before moving away. A ritual, a ceremony, something Sarah had never seen wolves perform, not for pack members, not for anything. As dusk fell, the alpha male lifted his head. He looked at the body beside him for a long moment. Then he howled. Sarah had recorded hundreds of wolf vocalizations, territorial howls, contact calls, hunt coordination. She knew the catalogue of wolf communication intimately. This was none of those things. This was grief. Pure, unmistakable, devastating grief. The sound carved through the forest, through the evening air, through Sarah's chest like something physical. Other wolves joined him. The alpha female, the beta, the subordinates, a chorus of loss that had no precedent in any research Sarah had ever read. She dropped her binoculars. Her knees hit the forest floor. The camera kept recording on its tripod, but Sarah couldn't watch anymore. She could only listen to wolves saying goodbye to a dog that had changed everything they understood about their world. They were mourning, not just accepting death, not moving on with the efficient pragmatism of wild animals, mourning with ceremony that looked human in its deliberateness, in its recognition that what was lost mattered beyond the immediate needs of survival. The alpha's howl broke something inside Sarah. It wasn't animal communication, it wasn't territorial marking or pack coordination. It was loss, pure and immeasurable. It was the sound of understanding that something precious had ended, something that couldn't be replaced. She stumbled back to her truck, sat in the driver's seat with her hands gripping the steering wheel. She couldn't document anymore. She could only feel the weight of what she'd witnessed. An alpha wolf who had chosen compassion, who had taught his family that mercy mattered more than hierarchy, who had protected and fed and loved a creature that every instinct said to kill, and who now grieved that creature's death like it was family, like it was pack, like the bond between them was real and sacred and worth this terrible, beautiful sorrow. The auditorium was silent, 300 researchers watching the footage of the alpha male lying beside the dog's body, listening to that howl, that impossible, heartbreaking howl that sounded like grief given voice. When the video ended, no one spoke. No one moved. Sarah stood at the podium, tears still wet on her face, and waited for the questions, the challenges, the scientific explanations that would reduce what she'd witnessed to aberrant behavior or anthropomorphic interpretation. Dr. Chen sat motionless in his seat. Dr. Voss had her hand pressed against her mouth. David, her mentor, had tears running down his face. She'd never seen him cry, not once in 20 years. A young graduate student in the back row raised her hand. Her voice shook when she spoke. What happened after? To the pack? Sarah took a breath, steadied herself. They buried the dog, covered the body with leaves and forest debris. Then they moved their den site about 2 miles north. I tracked them for 2 more weeks before I had to leave for this conference. They're functioning normally, hunting successfully. The pups are healthy. She paused. But the alpha male returns to the burial site every few days, sits there for hours. I don't have words for what that means. The auditorium stayed silent. Sarah gathered her materials, started to disconnect her laptop. Then Dr. Voss stood. I owe you an apology, she said. Her voice carried through the room. I questioned your methodology, suggested your footage was manipulated. I was wrong. Not just about the data, about what I thought wolves were capable of, about what I thought was possible in the animal world. Others nodded, murmured agreement. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, the terror that no one would believe her, that 17 months of documentation would be dismissed, that she'd be laughed out of her field. Instead, she'd shown them wonder, and they'd recognized it. Back in her university office months later, the rejection letters started arriving. Journal of Wildlife Management. Insufficient scientific explanation for observed behavior. Behavioral ecology. Methodology does not adequately control for observer bias. Animal cognition. Claims require more rigorous peer review before publication can be considered. 3 rejections, 3 prestigious journals unwilling to publish her findings because she couldn't explain them in ways that fit existing frameworks, because mercy and teaching and grief weren't concepts that belonged in wolf biology, because the data showed something that challenged 40 years of established research. Sarah pinned the rejections to her bulletin board, stared at them, felt the familiar weight of doubt. Maybe she had projected human emotions onto animal behavior. Maybe she'd seen what she wanted to see. Maybe 17 months of documentation meant nothing because she couldn't prove the alpha male felt compassion rather than just exhibited unusual behavior. Her email chimed, message from David. Some things are true whether we can explain them or not. Keep the faith. This matters more than publication. She kept one photograph on her desk, the alpha male lying beside the dog's body. Both of them peaceful in that final moment, connected in a way that transcended species. The image people couldn't accept because it challenged everything they thought they knew about the wall between wild and domestic, between instinct and choice, between survival and grace. I have the footage. I have 17 months of documented observations. I have photographs that show every moment. And still, some mornings, I wake up and think I imagined it. Not because it didn't happen, but because it's so beautiful. It feels like it shouldn't be allowed to exist in a world this harsh. Sarah told me this story in a coffee shop in Duluth. She showed me the photographs on her laptop, hands still trembling slightly when she reached the image of the morning ritual. They chose compassion, she said quietly. In a world where every calorie matters, where weakness means death, that alpha chose to teach his family that some things matter more than survival. I asked her if she still studies wolves. She nodded. But I don't study behavior anymore. I study capacity. Capacity for grace, for teaching, for changing what seems unchangeable. She closed her laptop. That wolf showed me something I'll never be able to prove in a peer-reviewed journal. That mercy isn't a human invention. We just forgot it's older than we are. Outside, snow began to fall. Sarah watched it through the window and smiled, sad, wondering, grateful all at once. "The Alpha still visits the grave," she said. "I get trail camera images sent to my email every week. Every few days, there he is, sitting beside where they buried the dog, still remembering, still honoring what they had." I think about Sarah's wolf often, about the choice he made when instinct said to do something else. Have you ever witnessed an animal choose something that defied every rule you thought governed their world? I'd love to hear what changed your understanding.